laugh even harder, even louder every time I watched it. If that's something you want to laugh at some more, we put that up on our Facebook page. You can go there, share that on your Facebook page, and encourage your neighborhood to throw a barbecue. And that's the thing we're really challenging everybody in Rhythm City to do this summer. We want you to put a date on the calendar sometime between now and the end of August and throw a barbecue. Because we know, as we've been looking at the last couple of weeks, that Jesus has called us to love our neighbor as ourselves, right? And oftentimes we've only thought of that phrase as a really great church phrase. Let's hang that on a poster. Let's put it on a plaque, hang it on a wall. Love your neighbor as yourself. Man, that sounds so good. But somewhere there's a disconnect between that and throwing a barbecue. And our job together is to bring them together. We believe it's hard to love your neighbor if you don't even know their name. If it's always been that awkward moment at the mailbox like you saw where you're thinking, I think his name is Jim and his name's really John, and that was awkward. Let's change all of that. Let's actually get into our neighborhoods. Let's throw a barbecue, a block party, and learn how to love our neighbors right where they're at. So over the last couple of weeks, we've looked at some of the challenges to why it is we aren't good at loving our neighbors. And much of it is because we're so busy, which is what we talked about last week. Today and next week, we're going to look at what is love and how do we love our neighbors in the way that Jesus is talking about in the context of love your neighbor as yourself, right? Jesus says 2 greatest commandments are love God with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, with all your heart, and love your neighbor as yourself, right? So if we're going to take that seriously, then we want to learn what is the love that Jesus is talking about in that passage? Like, what does that look like? What is love? We're going to wrestle with that today. And next week, we're going to look at how do you introduce the love of Jesus in your neighborhood? How do you bring about faith in the conversations you start having with the people that live around you and the neighbors that you have? So today, what is love? As soon as I say that phrase, I just can't help but get the idea and the image of the Night at the Roxbury video from Saturday Night Live in the movie. If you've ever seen it, the What is Love song by Haddaway. Anybody ever heard of Haddaway, maybe? Oh my gosh, yes. A bold few, right? Yeah, unfortunately I know who that is, right? That song where Will Ferrell and Chris Kattan and Jim Carrey all doing the little head nod thing, as the song's going on. And in that film, in that little skit, love is portrayed as just whatever can happen on the dance floor, right? And so they get out on the dance floor like, you want to dance with me? You want to dance with him? Me? And you get this whole thing. And love is just whatever can happen on the dance floor. And maybe that's kind of influenced the way we thought about love. In fact, we've got to ask the question today, who is defining love for us when we talk about love your neighbor as yourself? I mean, is love just a nice thing, being a nice neighbor? Is love just being kind? Or is love tolerance? Is love sacrifice? Who defines love for us? And when Jesus calls us to love our neighbor, what definition are we working with? That's what we're going to define today. Now, oftentimes, you've probably had love defined for you in some kind of cultural experience that you've had. I'll never forget the time that, well, unfortunately, I can't forget the Night at the Roxbury thing, but I also can't really get out of my mind the time I watched the movie Sandlot. Anybody ever watch Sandlot? Man, it's one of my favorites. You see the kids up here, right? You see love portrayed when all those guys come around the one dude who didn't realize that he threw away the Babe Ruth baseball. And what do? The whole movie, they're working on trying to get over into the backyard where the big dog is. What's the dog's name? Beast, right? Beast. Man, and trying to get over into Beast. So they build all these mechanisms and stuff to try and go get the ball. Man, these guys are trying hard. They're displaying this kind of love for their friend who needs to get the Babe Ruth baseball back, right? And so you see love portrayed in that kind of way. Or maybe kind of a more romantic love like you would see in Lady and the Tramp, right? Oh man, you guys, now this is love defined, isn't it? There's just nothing like the romantic moment that you experienced. In fact, what I want you to do is I want you to just think for a moment, what movie did I see when I was a kid that really kind of was a first portrayal of what love is? And I want you to just take a moment, think about that. Was it a Disney movie? Maybe it was Lady and the Tramp. Maybe it was something else that you saw. Maybe it was a TV show as a kid. This is what love is. And take 30 seconds and just share it across the table with somebody. What was that movie? What was that thing that, man, this showed me what love is? Take 30 seconds, share it with somebody at your table. All right, what are some of the ideas? Shout them out. What did you hear from somebody across the table? Was a little louder. Little Mermaid? Grease? Aladdin? A Whole New World, right? What else? Lion King? Oh man, that one grabs me every time. What else? Beauty and the Beast? Absolutely. All these movies, we realize that, man, somewhere along the way, somebody defines love for us. And somewhere in the movies or TV or what we hear in the news or now what we see on Twitter or on Facebook, the pictures that we see, all around us, culture is vying for a position to define what love is. And you see, sometimes that can be a little bit dangerous because today in culture, love is being taken on as a whole new thing. In fact, culture would probably define love today more as tolerance than anything else. If you see all throughout the media, if you see anything at all, you see all the time people are saying, that's not love if you don't let me believe what I want to believe, because I'll let you believe whatever you want to believe. This whole idea that as long as you can tolerate my beliefs, however I want to live my life, if you let me if you tolerate how I want to be, then I'll know you love me, right? In other words, we're basing true love on an emotion or some kind of sensory feeling. If you're tolerating the way I want to live my life, then that makes me feel good. It makes me feel all right. And really that comes from an idea that I've been justified in the way I live my life, and therefore I feel like what I'm doing in my life is good. Love is now based more on feeling than it is anything else, which can be extremely dangerous. I mean, it doesn't take long for any parents in the room to realize that love is not tolerance. Because if love equals tolerance, then anytime your kids took cookies from the cookie jar when you said no, you'd be like, oh, I love you, Johnny. That's good. Just do whatever you want to do, right? Love is not tolerance. Love is something else. And when it comes to the context that we want to wrestle with today of how a neighbor is supposed to be good to a neighbor and how you're supposed to love your neighbor as yourself, then somewhere we're going to face this rub, this tension with how can I love my neighbor well in the way that Jesus calls me to love my neighbor if their understanding of love, their definition of love is tolerance. Because your neighbor is going to expect you to come alongside them and condone however they want to live their life because that's what makes them feel good, right? You guys tracking with me? Love, on the other hand, is completely different. In fact, we're going to see this in the way that Jesus handles this tension. When culture longs for love to be defined by tolerance, Jesus steps in and defines it completely differently. And we have got to wrestle with this, church, because if we're going to love our neighbors well and love our neighbors as ourselves, then we have to know how to love them in a way that doesn't express tolerance, but expresses unconditional, genuine, authentic, love you where you're at kind of love. The love that we see in Jesus. Open your Bibles on your table or pull out an app on your phone. Go to John chapter 8 this morning. John chapter 8, the first 11 verses or so. We're going to see how Jesus handles this tension between love and tolerance and what this looks like. You see, as a Christian, and if you're not a Christian, then maybe you've seen this in your friends or you've seen it even here. There's a tension that we have between we believe in one true God and one faith, and that God is the ultimate truth and Scripture is truth, and from that defines what love is. That would be a tension point for somebody who is not a Christian. And if we're going to love that person right where they're at, then we've got an understanding of where they're coming from and how we can still show unconditional love in that situation. Okay, look at John chapter 8. Let's just read through these first 11 verses. Follow along as we hear this story. Jesus went to the Mount of Olives. At dawn, he appeared again in the temple courts. Notice the setting here. He's in the temple courts, a very public place. The teachers of the law, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the folks who love to just hammer the law down your throat and point the finger, say you're not living a good enough life. Those folks, man, they're all around. And you're going to see them here in just a moment. So they're in the temple courts where the people gathered around him, and he sat down to teach them. The teachers of the law, here we go, and the Pharisees brought in a woman caught in adultery. They made her stand before the group and said to Jesus, "Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery." Now just pause there for a second. Can you just put yourself in that situation and how embarrassing that would be if that was you? I mean, maybe it's not in a bar like this, but the stage very similar like this, where Jesus would be up in front of everybody teaching, and all of a sudden he gets interrupted by the teachers of the law, the very religious people. And they bring up this woman who was caught in adultery. Now, if this woman was caught in the act of adultery, which is what this says, a woman caught in adultery, then you've probably got to assume that she hasn't had an opportunity to wear her Sunday best. Okay, we'll just put it that way. She hasn't had an opportunity to put herself together, to be presentable, like maybe you would want to have the time to do if you go out somewhere. She's been dragged out of this situation, brought up in front of all these people, are being threatened by these overly religious finger-pointing people, and is brought before Jesus. All these teachers of the law say, "Hey, Jesus," verse 5, "in the law, Moses commanded us to stone women like this. Now, what do you say we should do?" Verse 6, all these Pharisees, the leaders of the law, they were using this question as a trap in order to have a basis for accusing him. Again, this whole time, everybody's trying to catch Jesus in some kind of heresy so that they can get rid of him, because they feel threatened by Jesus. He's coming and bringing grace in the middle of situations where these teachers of the law want to bring law and judgment and condemnation on them. Jesus is bringing grace. But Jesus bent down and started to write on the ground with his finger. Verse 6. Now in verse 7. When they kept on questioning him, he straightened up and said to them, you got to imagine, I mean, if Jesus is crouching down and writing something in the sand, I wish we knew what it was he was saying. There's speculations out there, but I wish we knew what it was he was saying. Or writing in the sand. And if he's doing that and not responding like everybody else in the room would expect him to give some kind of quick response, the moment he does stand up to say something, you got to believe it's quiet enough to hear a pin drop. And Jesus says in verse 7, if any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. Again, he stooped down and started to write in the ground. Man. At this, verse 9, those who heard began to go away one at a time. And notice who goes first. The older ones first, until only Jesus was left, with the woman still standing there. Isn't it interesting that the older Pharisees, the older teachers of the law were the ones to leave first, because they are that much aware of the truth that, you know what, I'm far from being a person without sin. I'll be the first to admit I can't throw the first stone. And then the younger ones follow suit, and soon everybody is gone. And now it's just Jesus and this woman who hasn't had an opportunity to put herself together, has been brought out of adultery, has been completely humiliated. And in this moment, Jesus shows love and grace. And he says to the woman, "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" The woman says, "No one, sir." "Then neither do I condemn you," Jesus declared. "Go now and leave your life of sin." I think what we would expect a very religious person to do, which is how I think most non-Christians perceive church people to be, very religious people, we would expect this woman to be caught in adultery and for us to say, "You shouldn't do that. You better get your life right. You better put things together again. You got to get your act together." And yet, Jesus extends compassion, grace, forgiveness, a second chance on life. Because when he looks at this woman, he doesn't see an adulteress. He sees a child. He doesn't see a sinner. He sees his daughter. And I wonder, when we go to love our neighbors, if we're functioning with that same filter over our eyes. Are we seeing people and giving them an identity as a sinner, as somebody who's different from me, and we're making assumptions that this person is going to live this way, is going to act this way, and therefore it's hard for me to even be around that person. And we just assume there's nothing I can do to love this person because that is an adulteress, that's a liar, that's an addict. And we just so quickly identify them as somebody who is actually just like me. That I am that addict, I am that liar, I am that cheater, I am that sinful person just like them. And thank God the Father doesn't look at me through that same lens. If the Father only saw me as addict, sinner, on down the line, I'd be out of hope. Thankfully, the Father sees me, and the Father sees you, and the Father even sees your neighbors through the lens of Jesus' blood. See, where culture would say that love is tolerance, God comes in and he says love is actually unconditional in spite of your sin. Doesn't condone your sin, it's in spite of sin. God would still say that sin is in need of punishment, that there's still wrath that should be paid out for that punishment. There's still discipline. But he took all of that out on Jesus on the cross instead of taking it out on you. So we've got to ask the question, why is it we see people first for their sin and second as a person? When Jesus right here is setting a model for us, saying, first you got to see them as a person, and more importantly, you should see them as a child of the Father first. Love them in spite of their sin. Love them in spite of their differences from you. And let God take care of the sin piece. See, what our neighbors need and what the city needs, what you need, what I need is life spoken into us. We need to be reminded there is hope, that we're not in this alone, that we don't have to overcome our sin by ourselves, that we don't have to be a good enough, do-good Christian to earn God's favor. Instead, Jesus has already won that for us in his victory over death when he rose from the grave after being crucified on the cross for you. And all of that sin, God didn't tolerate. He took care of it on the cross. So that now you would be seen as a son, as a daughter, not as an addict, or an adulteress, or a liar, or a thief, or a poor husband, or a poor mother, or a disappointing son or daughter or brother. You are now the most prized possession of the King, son, daughter of the Father. So if we're going to define love today, we've got to define love in terms of how God sees our neighbors. That he sees our neighbors through the lens of Jesus as a son, as a daughter, first. And as he speaks that life into us, as he starts to restore us, as his Holy Spirit starts to give life in us, that life starts to push out the sin, the mess, the darkness, the addiction, the struggle, the hurt, the pain, and starts to push it out of us so that there's no more room left for it. Which means that you as a neighbor don't have to worry about how they live their life, how they make their decisions, what they prioritize in their life, how different their values are from yours, or even their belief system, what they're addicted to, or anything like that. You need to first be concerned with letting them know that there's life and demonstrating life in them, just as Jesus does with this woman. Woman, you are forgiven. There's no one here to condemn you. Can you imagine the life that she experienced when Jesus said that? Oh, thank you. Now, go and live your life. Leave your life of sin and sin no more. God will instill life in our neighborhoods as we start to live lives full of him in our neighborhoods. I remember as a kid when my parents would deal with my sin. You know what they would do? They would say, son, of course reminding me of my identity, that I wasn't just a cookie thief, or I wasn't just a kid who couldn't follow through on chores. Man, I can't even tell you how many times I got in trouble for not vacuuming the family room. You know what I mean? Like things like that. They would always say, son. And then they'd give me my discipline for whatever it was that I didn't do, or whatever offense I committed or whatever I did. They disciplined me. Son, no TV for a month. Oh, Dad, Mom, are you kidding me? Seriously? That's so unfair, right? You guys never do that, do you? Ever? No? Man, I did that all the time. Maybe you did too. It's like, oh, no, come on. And in that moment, I'm so frustrated. I'm so upset because, Dad, Mom, you clearly don't love me because you would never take away TV from me. Don't you know? If you take away TV, then I can't play Nintendo 64. Come on. That's a double whammy. You clearly don't love me. And yet, what my parents would always do, and I hated it in the moment, but now I'm so grateful for it, they would always say, son, no TV for a month, but we always want you to know we still love you. I'll never forget that. Because for me, they were always demonstrating this sin in your life, it's not okay, but our love for you is not conditioned on what you've done in the past or how you've offended us or how you let us down or how you didn't follow through. I think our neighbors need to hear that no matter what is in their past, they know that you care about them, that you love them. Then I fast forward to just 4 months ago today. 4 months ago today, me and I got married, and my dad did the ceremony and was preaching. And I really don't remember a whole lot of the sermon of what he said. I'm sure it was really profound or something like that. But what I do remember was at the beginning of that message, my dad looked me straight in the eye, and I'm standing at the bottom of the stairs with my bride in my hand, staring at my dad, and he says, son, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of you. And to be honest, you guys, I feel like I really haven't done anything to make my dad proud. But you know why he's proud? It's because I'm his son and he loves me. It has nothing to do with my performance track record, or how good of a son I've been, or how few of times I've let him down, or many times I've let him down. I'm his son. And because of that, he says, I'm proud of you. Church, maybe before your neighbors hear it from you, you just need to hear today. You have a Father in heaven who's looking down on you this morning. Says, son, daughter, I'm proud of you. That's the love that God gives. It's not conditioned on anything in your past. You just simply are his son. You simply are his daughter, and he loves you. That's the love. Love defined by God. Unconditional love that he wants us to give away in our neighborhoods. So as you throw your barbecues this summer, as you start preparing for that date that you put on the calendar, you circle the date and say, neighborhood barbecue this day. I want you to start praying about, God, what's the simple thing you can have me do at that barbecue, or between now and that barbecue, or after the barbecue, that I can simply show someone unconditional love? And maybe it is in the form of a very simple, kind gesture. Maybe it's in an emotional conversation. Somebody's just dying to open up to somebody. But to begin praying, God, give me an opportunity to show your love to my neighbors.